George's mom, Kate Middleton, of course, took those photos. This one appropriately showing him in a camo t-shirt, since apparently he's become obsessed with helicopters, which makes sense because his dad.
The British monarchy has always valued poise, particularly from its heirs. Royal children are taught from an early age to wave without fidgeting, smile without saying anything, and absorb the world's gaze without blinking. And for the past 10 years, Prince George has done exactly that. An image of royal poise, a symbol of continuity. The future king is perfectly packaged. However, behind the palace walls, the story is different. He is not only composed, but also observant. He monitors everything. Adults believe he is unaware of the conversations, silences between words, the weight of glances, which convey more meaning than speeches. He's growing up in a palace where legacy is everything, and not every smile is genuine. And recently, something changed. According to several palace insiders, it occurred on a quiet Sunday evening. Prince George, who is typically reserved and polite, asked his father a question that instantly changed the tone of the room. "Why doesn't Queen Camilla want me to be king?" Prince William was stunned and did not speak at first. Kate reportedly froze in mid-motion. It was not the type of question a child would ask to get attention. It was calm, calculated, like someone who had been collecting data and was finally ready to deliver the verdict. George added a second sentence, one that chilled everyone who heard it. "I'll show you the real Queen Camilla." The remark was not a tantrum. It was not disrespectful. It was a reflection from a child who had grown up witnessing how power behaves when it believes no one is watching. George had been paying attention. What followed was not particularly loud. It was not messy, but it was seismic. The heir to the throne, the boy the public adores, the one who reminds them of Diana's gentleness and William's resolve, had just revealed a truth no one wanted to know, not because it was so dramatic, but it was credible. For years, Queen Camilla has exercised soft power. In public, she is King Charles's steadfast companion. According to insiders, she is more calculating behind closed doors. And now that Charles is dealing with serious health issues, her influence is growing, just as George appears. But what if Camilla assumed the next generation wouldn't notice? She was wrong, because this time the heir is watching, listening, and speaking. Prince George's revelation may be the most unsettling truth the palace has faced in years. The halls of Windsor Castle have had their fair share of whispers. But what Prince George heard was not a whisper. It was a plain-spoken conversation between Queen Camilla and two trusted aides, not intended for royal ears, and certainly not his. It reportedly occurred during a quiet spring weekend. The family had gathered for a quiet retreat. The atmosphere was calm. Charles was resting. William was deep in briefings. Kate was with Charlotte and Louis. George, wandering the stone corridors between the royal apartments, came to a halt at a corner. He didn't intend to eavesdrop, but the moment he heard his name, he froze. According to a senior staffer who later revealed to a royal biographer, George remained motionless behind an ornate partition for nearly 5 minutes, listening. And what he heard shocked him. Camilla, speaking in a hushed but undeniably firm tone, reportedly said, "He is too soft, too sensitive. The world will eat him alive if we give it to him too soon." She wasn't referring to just any child. She was talking about the future king, her stepson's son. Then came the following blow. William still has a lot to prove. Charles should reign for as long as possible, at least until George is out of adolescence. We need consistency, not idealism. George didn't fully grasp every nuance, but he knew enough. Camilla did not believe in him. Later that night, during dinner, George was quiet. He picked at his meal. William inquired if he felt ill. Kate gently brushed his hair back and asked if he was tired. He said nothing. But before bedtime, he knocked on William's door. He stood alone in the doorway, in his slippers, and said, "She does not want me to become king. I overheard her." William's face reportedly turned pale. George then repeated almost verbatim what he had heard Camilla say. And then, with all the gravity of a boy stuck between childhood and responsibility, he said, "I'll show you the real Queen Camilla." It was not a threat. It was not even anger. It was something more unsettling, a promise. a recognition that he, even at his age, understood the stakes. George had always been a cautious child, polite, private. What about now? He was alert, and what happened next was even more telling. The next morning, George refused to participate in a photo call with Charles and Camilla. Courtiers scrambled. The official explanation was that he had a cold. However, those close to the family claim it was intentional, a quiet act of resistance. Camilla noticed. She allegedly asked Kate, half joking, "Am I not royal enough for him?" Kate gave a polite smile. Something had changed on the inside, however. The boy who had once admired Camilla as a dependable presence now saw her as someone who did not want him to succeed. And whether the palace admits it or not, that moment marked the beginning of a new kind of tension within the royal walls. The future king had looked behind the curtain. What he heard would not be forgotten. In public, Queen Camilla is reserved, always composed and diplomatic. She speaks softly. She laughs gently during engagements. She waves, poses, and moves through the world as if the decades of scandal had faded away. But behind the palace walls, her voice sounds different. According to several staff members who have worked closely with her, Camilla has developed a habit of asking questions that raise doubts rather than issuing commands. And in recent months, as King Charles's health has deteriorated, those concerns have shifted to the line of succession, particularly Prince George. "She never says things directly," one aide admitted. "She'll say things like, 'It's a heavy burden for a child, isn't it?' Or, 'Do you really think he's ready for the attention?'" At first, these comments were dismissed as the musings of a concerned grandmother. However, a pattern gradually emerged. Camilla would ask why George was given certain public roles. She reportedly objected to his increased visibility during royal ceremonies. According to one source, while planning King Charles's 75th birthday celebrations, Camilla privately suggested that maybe we should keep the focus on the king, not the heir's heir. It was subtle. It was always couched in terms of loyalty to Charles, but the implication was clear. Camilla did not want the public's attention to shift towards George just yet. During another private meeting, when a senior aide mentioned the importance of modernizing the monarchy and involving the younger royals more, Camilla allegedly scoffed and responded, "The crown does not require children. It requires stability." When this comment was relayed back to William, he was reportedly furious. Kate, ever the mediator, urged calm, but the damage was done. When William and Kate mentioned the tension to George, expecting confusion, he simply nodded. "I know," he replied. "She doesn't believe in me." Even more concerning, George had begun to notice Camilla's tendency to avoid looking at him in public. She'd greet Charlotte and Louis with gentle kisses or comments. However, George frequently responded with a polite nod or nothing at all. And palace insiders claimed that George, who was naturally perceptive, felt the chill. "She's nice when people are watching," he allegedly told a tutor. "But when they're not, she forgets I'm there." That statement alarmed William and Kate, not because of what it said about Camilla, but because it confirmed what they had suspected. George was not imagining things. He felt it, and he was not wrong. Camilla's supporters argue that she is simply cautious, having witnessed the toll the spotlight can take on young royals, that she's attempting to shield George from unnecessary pressure. Others disagree. "She's protecting the throne, not the boy," said one former aide. "She understands that if Charles falters, William rises. George joins him. She's attempting to prolong her reign by keeping the future at bay." Whatever her motivations, one thing is certain: Prince George feels them. And in a family where heir treatment determines history, the Queen's quiet efforts to postpone the inevitable may be more damaging than anyone in the palace realizes, because the future king is no longer simply watching. He's remembering. To the general public, nothing seemed amiss. Queen Camilla smiled. Prince George stood where protocol required, and the royal family performed their carefully choreographed dance. Those who knew how to look, those who understood the subtlety of palace drama, began to notice the distance, the stiffening, the silence. At royal events, George began to take more deliberate positions. At first, he'd stand alongside his parents. What about now? Observers noticed how he avoided being placed right next to Camilla. When a seating arrangement required proximity, George remained composed, but visibly uncomfortable. The warmth that once existed, however slight, had cooled to something colder than formality. It wasn't a rebellion, there was restraint. "He's not rude," a palace aide said. "He is cautious. It's as if he's constantly on guard when she's nearby, like he's measuring her in the same way she's been measuring him." The cameras also noticed George stepped slightly away from Camilla at a garden party, according to video clips that circulated online. George avoided eye contact as she approached him during a church service. George turned to speak with Kate when Camilla addressed the audience. It was subtle, yes, but this is the House of Windsor, where subtleties speak volumes. During Trooping the Color, George smiled respectfully at King Charles before giving a soft nod to Queen Camilla. Even the nod appeared hesitant, controlled. He seemed to be doing it out of obligation rather than affection. "There's no warmth," body language expert Dr. Fiona Marlowe said during a live analysis. "There is civility, but it's difficult, especially for a child who has been raised to act naturally in front of cameras." Inside the palace, the growing distance was noticed. William and Kate began to request more space for George, including fewer formal appearances and more time away from Camilla. It was not framed as punishment. It was framed as preservation. However, according to sources, Camilla was aware of the shift. She has begun to question why George appears off with her, one insider revealed. She called it rudeness, but no one has corrected her, because they understand the truth. And the truth? It is not about defiance. It is about disappointment. Prince George is not acting out. He is not rejecting the crown, his family, or the traditions he was born into. He is protecting something, his future, his identity, his place in a family that frequently forgets to allow room for emotion. And as Camilla continues to rise, hosting state banquets, attending solo events, assuming a role once reserved for queens by birth or long-standing approval, George notices something different. Not a monarch, a manipulator. And for a boy raised on stories about Princess Diana's strength, compassion, and the cost of silence, Queen Camilla embodies everything he's been taught to question. That is why he does not rebel. He just watches, he waits, and with each strained glance and subtle shuffle away, he sends a message that the palace has yet to decipher. "I understand who you really are." Prince George has never met his grandmother. He only knows her through stories, photographs, and the look of admiration in his father's eyes when her name is mentioned. Princess Diana, however, is more than just a historical figure to George. She is a presence that fills the void left by the palace's silence. "She's with us," William reportedly told George once, in response to a bedtime question about why their home contains no framed pictures of Camilla, but several of Diana. "She always will be." That is the truth Camilla cannot touch, regardless of how many state dinners she hosts, regardless of how many charities she champions, regardless of how many pearls she wears with a measured smile, she will never be Diana. And George is fully aware of this. He grew up in a family that does not glorify the past, but also does not ignore it. William and Kate have made a concerted effort to honor Diana's legacy, focusing on values rather than ceremony, kindness, empathy, service without fanfare. These values have become ingrained in George, but they've also created an unmistakable contrast. Camilla is addressed with caution, whereas Diana is spoken of with warmth. Where Diana is remembered with tears and laughter, Camilla is mentioned in terms of logistics and scheduling. Whereas the public adored Diana for her vulnerability, Camilla is accepted for her resilience but rarely loved. And, according to George, the most important currency of royalty is love. He's overheard more than people realize, including late-night conversations between William and Kate, hushed mentions of public backlash, and even clips of old footage in which his grandmother touches a dying man's hand without gloves, causing the crowd to weep. She cared. George once stated during a school project about family. She helped people feel less alone. He sees Camilla without malice. There is something worse, distance. He knows she's a member of the family. He understands politics, marriage, and duty. But he doesn't understand why she doesn't appear to care like Diana does. He senses it in the stiffness of her hugs, the rote nature of her praise, and the way she smiles through him rather than at him. Yes, Camilla is part of his lineage. What about Diana? Diana is part of his standard. And this is what makes Camilla's position so precarious. Because while the crown may legitimize her presence, it cannot erase the quiet comparisons made by the next generation, particularly the boy who will one day wear the crown himself. George carries Diana's blood, her cheekbones, her eyes, her instincts, and he doesn't see Camilla as a throne mate. He sees a shadow over a legacy that has never been given the opportunity to shine fully. One former aide reported hearing George say something chilling in its clarity. If she had lived, everything would be different. He was not accusing. He was in mourning, and that quiet grief, for a grandmother he never knew, for a history rewritten to Camilla's advantage, is shaping him. Because one day he will become king, and when that day comes, he won't remember Camilla standing by his side. It will be the legacy of the woman who the world still refers to as the people's princess. The contrast will be impossible to ignore. It was supposed to be a triumph, a day of unity, legacy, and royal tradition. King Charles III's coronation was the culmination of decades of anticipation, a display of power adorned with velvet, gold, and centuries-old ritual. However, those who watched closely noticed that one moment did not go as planned. The person who noticed was Prince George. He played a role that day, a historical one. As page of honor, he stood steps behind his grandfather, holding the monarch's robes and walking in perfect step through Westminster Abbey. The cameras captured every expression and movement. He was poised, dutiful. He was regal beyond his years. But something changed when Queen Camilla arrived. Observers noticed something immediately. George's posture stiffened. His face, which had been focused but soft just moments before, became cold. His gaze did not follow Camilla. They focused straight ahead. Then came the gesture. As Camilla approached, William leaned down and quietly reminded George to bow, a simple ceremonial acknowledgement of her role alongside the king. George did not move. There was a pause that lasted a fraction of a second too long. Then he mechanically lowered his head. However, those who paid close attention saw it as a disrespectful gesture. It was a requirement, not a choice. What didn't happen next was even louder. Several family members congratulated Camilla following the ceremony. Hugs, curtsies, kiss on the cheek. Charlotte offered one. Louis, wrangled into politeness, gave a quick nod and smile. What about George? He gave nothing. No contact, no smile, not even eye contact. He walked past her with the same deliberate composure he'd honed throughout his life, but with none of the affection expected on such a historic occasion. Insiders at the palace described it as a quiet moment of tension, while body language experts described it as emotional distance veiled in protocol. Those who have watched George grow, however, saw something simpler, a decision. He did not cause any disruption. He did not disobey, but he made it clear. Camilla may be wearing the crown, but she does not have the future king's approval. And in a monarchy where gestures are currency, that silence was invaluable. Inside Buckingham Palace, silence is often more audible than scandal. It is how the firm survives. When headlines swirl, rumors spread, and tensions rise behind closed doors, the official response is always the same: no comment. And that strategy has proven effective as Prince George distances himself from Queen Camilla. There have been no statements, no denials, no clarifications. But behind the scenes, aides are whispering, not whether it's true, but how long they can keep pretending it isn't. Because what is happening right now is more than just a clash of personalities. It's a collision of generations. Camilla was never supposed to be queen. She fought her way into that position slowly and carefully, with palace machinery easing the transition. However, her legitimacy is still being questioned. Her reign is fragile. Her approval is conditional. Prince George? He doesn't need to fight. He represents the future. And this reality is starting to shift the balance of power within the monarchy. Every movement George makes is being observed. Every word he says to William and Kate is being evaluated. He is being groomed not only to be a figurehead, but also to make decisions. A symbol for the next era. And most importantly, he recognizes it. A former senior courtier recently shared a revelation that sent ripples through royal watchers. George does not consider Camilla a family member. He sees her as someone who occupies space that should have gone to someone else. That is the part that the palace will not reveal, publicly at least. That the heir to the throne distrusts the queen consort, that he has seen her make moves behind the scene, that he has observed how she positions herself when Charles is ill, how she directs public attention to her own causes, and how she subtly casts doubt on the line of succession. And he's still watching. Every ceremony, each whisper, every photograph in which she smiles a little too broadly while standing where Diana never had the opportunity to. Prince George is not angry, he's learning. When he reaches the throne, he will remember those who supported him and who didn't. He did not raise his voice. He did not rebel. He did not storm out of palaces or write memoirs. Prince George did nothing but watch, and when the time came, he spoke the words that would reverberate beyond the palace walls. "I'll show you the real Queen Camilla." It was not a threat, it was the truth. A quiet declaration from a boy born into tradition, surrounded by protocol, and groomed to wear a crown that has crushed men far older than him. However, George carries it differently, with precision, with stillness, with wisdom beyond his years. The world still considers him a child. However, behind the palace gates, they are beginning to realize that this is a child who listens, who notices, who remembers. And when his time comes, he will not govern with naivety. He will rule using memory. He'll remember how Camilla moved when no one was looking. He'll recall the times she ignored him, the words she whispered in private, and the expressions she wore when the cameras weren't flashing. He will recall the conversations she believed he was too young to understand. One day, when he holds the scepter and the crown rests on his head, he will remember those who believed in him and who didn't. For the time being, Queen Camilla may still be the center of attention. She may still sit beside King Charles, smile for portraits, give speeches, and shake hands. What about the boy who will inherit everything? He's already planning the next chapter, and this time, the crown will not shield those who stood in their way. Prince George does not need to shout. He does not need a scandal. He doesn't need vengeance. He possesses something much more powerful, the truth. And the truth, said softly, seen clearly, remembered forever, is this. The future king has already decided where his loyalties lie. It is not with Camilla. He intends to reshape the monarchy, the one where ghosts are honored, where shadows do not rule. And where will Queen Camilla's reign be remembered? As the prologue to the main story,